guys, it's Alex, and today we're talking Gen 1 Coyote boosted manual applications. So we've already covered naturally aspirated Gen 1 manual and auto. Now we're going to cover Gen 1 manual boosted applications and the, let's just say, most generic way of going 10s, 9s, and maybe dip into the 8s. Now, I'm not even going to touch 11s because if you have a boosted manual Mustang and you can't go 11s, I probably can't help you any further than that. You can miss a couple of gears and still go 11s. But let's talk about going 10s in a manual Gen 1 Coyote Mustang. What does it take? Well, stock transmission, not a problem. Can go 10s very easily. The gear ratio is up in the air. You can have 331s with a positive displacement blower, meaning Whipple, TVS, Edelbrock, you name it, basically a blower on top of the engine. I think 331s work better for that application. And you can do it on pump gas. You can absolutely go 10s on pump gas with a Gen 1 Coyote, no problem, manual. So, just like in the previous videos, we're gonna assume you already have a sticky tire, we're gonna assume you have a drive shaft, we're gonna assume you have a shifter and a decent clutch. Today we're talking about just the power that is necessary to run that number. So, let's say you wanna supercharge the car. You can get to 10s a lot easier, in my opinion, with a positive displacement supercharger. Now you have a bunch of options of superchargers that were available back in 2011 through 2014. You have the 2.9 rear feed Whipple and the 2.3 rear feed Whipple. I would take those superchargers and totally just ignore them. They are, in my opinion, not efficient and not really in the conversation of powerful, efficient superchargers. They created a lot of heat and didn't necessarily put out the kind of power that the size of the supercharger warranted. So let's stick to 2.3 liter VMP or Roush superchargers and front feed 3.0 Gen 5 Whipple superchargers. Now, in my opinion, these are the two more popular combos, and these are the ones that are going to get you into the 10s the easiest. So if you have a manual Mustang, all you really need is a booster pump. Again, I'm assuming you have everything else: drive shaft, drag pack, off-road exhaust, and a clutch. I'm assuming you already have that from your NA days. So you're gonna need a booster pump. Why? We need to bring the voltage up on the stock fuel pump from the regular 14 that it puts out when the car is running to between 16 and 18. Now you can get a regular plug and play booster pump or fuel pump voltage booster. Doesn't matter the brand, in my opinion, any of them will work fine. I would stay away from the adjustable stuff. Plug and play, set it and forget it. So you need a booster pump for the added fuel flow. You need, at minimum, an MU52 injector from a 13 or 14 GT500. In my opinion, that's the quickest way to have your fueling needs be met and a booster pump if you're only shooting for 10s. The reason I mentioned that's a good 10-second combo, because that's what I had. And the car went 1080s in that exact combo. Drag radial, so I slipped the clutch. It had 373s, it had MU52s, it had an 82 millimeter pulley when it was a TVS. But if you have a Whipple supercharger, like a front feed, I think you'll need like a 3.8 or so. You'll have to go by their pulley chart, but 10 PSI. That's all you need to run 10s in a manual Gen 1 Coyote Mustang. So now let's dip into the 9s. This is where you're gonna have to spend some money. Let's be honest. You're gonna need to spend a decent amount of money to get a manual Gen 1 Coyote car into the 9s. Now, if you wanna roll the dice, you might be able to do it on the stock bottom end. I was very close to doing it, and many people have done it since, gone 9s with a stock bottom end Gen 1 Coyote. So if you're willing to roll the dice and let's say you can afford to replace the motor, you can get about 13 to 15 PSI depending on the configuration from a similar supercharger, Whipple or VMP, and clutch, all that stuff. E85 or race gas is something you're gonna need. Why? Because you need more timing. You need a fuel that has a lot of knock resistance. Let's just say it's not prone to detonating easily. So that could be, whether it be a petroleum-based fuel like C16, MS109, or Sunoco 260 GT. But in my opinion, let's just go E85. So on top of the fact that you already have the stuff that you needed to go 11s, now you're gonna need to Get some fuel in there, E85, 1000cc injector, a 4 Innovations level 2 at least with two 285 pumps running hot all the time, and E85. So we can bring the boost up. You already have the fuel system, so let's get that boost up to about, let's say between 13 and 15 PSI. You're gonna need to launch the car really hard, so that bias ply tire that you had when it was NA and kind of max effort, well, you're gonna need it when it comes to boost, unless you're willing to slip the clutch hardcore. But when it comes to 9-second quarter mile ETs, you have to rev that sucker up, potentially launch it on a two-step, and dump that clutch and let the tire and suspension do the work. It's really difficult, in my opinion, to run 9s when you're slipping the clutch, because you have to launch so aggressively and get the 60-foot sub 1.3 or at least sub 1.4 to be able to achieve that efficiently. Now, a lot of people are asking, why don't you mention Paxton, Vortec, and ESSs? Well, I'm gonna be honest with you guys. You need torque to get out of the hole, and most of the ET is made up in the front half of the track. So if you're quarter mile racing, which is what we're outlining here, I think you should stick to the Roots, twin screw, or TVS style blowers. Kenny Bell can be in the conversation also. I just haven't mentioned them all that much because it's really not a popular blower for these applications as much as Whipple and VMP or Roush TVS superchargers are. So you need E85, 1000cc injector, a fuel system. I'm assuming you already have the drag pack, the drive shaft, all that stuff. Your transmission. Now, to run 9s on a stock MT82 is something that could be achieved, but I don't think you'll be able to do it more than a couple of times. The stock MT82 has notoriously weak gears and not so great shift forks. So you're gonna have to make a decision. Should I build it if I want to, let's say, run a season running in the 9s or low 10s stick shift Gen 1 Coyote? I think you should treat the transmission the same as you would treat your bottom end, your stock bottom end rods and pistons on the Gen 1 Coyote. One of them is gonna let go. The Gen 1 Coyote, you're good to about 740 to 760 rear wheel horsepower, and at any moment the rod can just exit stage left and make a window on your block. The MT82, same thing. At any moment it can let go at a certain power level. Heck, even stock, they've been known to let go pretty easily. So you're either gonna upgrade the transmission to a Ben Calimer Stage 3 MT82, or you get yourself a T56 Magnum XL. I would stay away from the TR6060, not because it's bad. I just think if you're gonna spend that kind of money, let's just go ahead and get a T56 Magnum XL in there. You're gonna have to upgrade your clutch also. I highly suggest the Mantic Dual at that power level, and I think you're gonna be in a good spot. So that, in my opinion, is a great 10-second combination when it comes to Gen 1 manual Coyotes. I had a T56, 4 10s in mind. That's the other thing you have to remember. When you get a T56, the gear ratios totally change, whether you get a 297 first gear ratio T56 or a 2.66 first gear ratio T56. The 2.66 is tighter ratio. The 297 first has a bigger drop off between first and second, if I'm not mistaken. Fourth is 1-to-1, so you're definitely gonna have to re-gear your diff to a 410 so that it would feel like an MT82 with a 331. Once you see the gear ratios on paper, you'll understand why it makes sense. So now let's talk about 8-second quarter miles. This is serious big boy stuff. You need well over 1,000 rear wheel horsepower to achieve this, because from 990 to 890, it is a completely different ballgame. You need over 300 more horse or over 250 more horse, or have an extremely light chassis to achieve that goal. Now, this is where turbos come into play. In my opinion, you can do it easier with turbo stuff. There's On3 kits, there's Aldo kits, there's Hellion kits, there's also fluid twin turbo kits for Gen 1s that are very capable of making well over 1,000 rear wheel horsepower. But if you're gonna stick to supercharger stuff, we're gonna have to either extremely pulley down and up, meaning bigger balancer, smaller upper on the Whipple, say a 20% and like a 3.0, or on the TVS front, you're gonna have to upgrade the head unit from a 2300 2.3 to a 2.6 liter Gen 3 version. Those superchargers are capable of 1,000 rear wheel horsepower without even sneezing at it. They do have ported versions. In my opinion, you should call VMP if you want to have a certain power goal. They can configure something for you, but in my experience, a regular cased Gen 3, 10% lower, and a 69 millimeter upper is good for 1,000 rear wheel horsepower. So now you have 1,000 rear wheel horsepower. Actually, before we do go there, what are you gonna do about the motor? The stock Gen 1 Coyote will not make 1,000 horsepower without literally grenading itself to death. So you're either gonna have to put rods and pistons in it, which that's what I would do. A lot of people ask me, what would you do if you were to have a Gen 1 Coyote and you wanted to build it? Well, I have to see what my goals are. And if my goals are to run 8s, it's gotta be built. It's gotta be built. Can you do it with a Gen 2 Mustang? Shoot, Gen 2 Mustang bottom end or Gen 3 Mustang bottom end? Potentially, for maybe a dozen runs or so. But if I want to do it for a season, I'm gonna get a rods and pistons and sleeve that motor, potentially bump up the compression if I have the opportunity to do so, but 11-to-1 will be fine. Stock compression, rods, pistons, and sleeves. Now that motor is not necessarily bulletproof, but it's a lot better than my stock Gen 1 Coyote. So not only will you need a trans, not only will you need a motor rebuild, not only will you need potentially twin turbos or a big single or a really aggressively pulleyed Whipple or a 2.6 liter TVS, you're also gonna need a really badass transmission, T56 or a Ben Calmer Stage 3, and you have to brace the differential. This is now where it gets really expensive. The differential that you have where it has 331s or 373s and a 31 spline axle from the factory, that's good enough to get you into the 9s. Heck, I almost went 9s with a bone stock diff, 10-1, 139, and when I tried to launch it above 6,000 RPMs with a 72 millimeter pulley, it grenaded. And that was that. Sold the car shortly after that. But if you want to run a season with it, you're gonna have to spend the money. You're gonna have to get 9-inch ends. You're gonna have to get 35 spline axles. You're gonna have to get a spool. In my opinion, get a spool if you're drag racing. Just bypass the actual differential or an S-track or a wave track or anything track that allows one wheel to spin independently of each other. You have to get after it and get a spool. So 35 spline or 33 spline, 9-inch ends, 5/8 studs. That's right, we are trying to launch a 3,500 pound car at super high RPMs or with a decent amount of boost getting out of the hole. So we need 5/8 studs back there, and you have to brace that differential, swar bar or custom bracing and welding of the axle tubes to make sure that nothing grenades itself on the launch. This is where people usually try to sell their cars because it is becoming extremely expensive at that point. And 1,000 rear wheel horsepower, cut a 60-foot sub 1.3. You have turbos, you can scramble at the top, 20 plus PSI, or a Gen 3 at 20 plus PSI, or a Gen 5 front feed Whipple, making killer boost. I think anything that makes 1,000 rear wheel horsepower stick shift should be able to get an 890 in good weather. So this is my very generic, general way of lining out 10s, 9s, 8s in a stick shift Gen 1 Coyote. It gets really expensive, sub 9 second. So stay tuned for the next video where I'll be talking about doing the exact same thing, but with a Gen 1 6R80 Coyote. You'll be surprised how much easier it is to do it with that than with a stick. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll talk to you later.